Wherever you are, wherever you receive this, welcome to Trinity Place in Geneva, New York. My name is Cameron Miller, and I'm going to cheat today. I'm going to try to make lemonade out of lemons. I'm talking about the orthodox doctrine of the Trinity, because this is Trinity Sunday on the church calendar. And by cheating, I mean that I'm going to tell you a story that I have told before. You may or may not have heard it from me, I'm not sure, because I think it is such a wonderful story, and it is worth remembering and remembering. So this topic is worth touching on too, because of who we are here, meaning Trinity Place, and because this actually is the first Sunday, or the first time we will have gathered for worship completely free, unencumbered of a building that once shackled us. You see, about half this congregation here that is resident here migrated to Trinity Place from the big Trinity Church up on the hill, a little Gothic building. And most who did migrate here from that had a very long, very dear relationship or connection to Trinity Church, which is a 200-year-old congregation, almost 225 years old almost. The other half of this congregation has found their way here during or after this transition. And most of the newer folk here are here precisely because we are not Orthodox. And that may likely be also why you listen to this, because you're not Orthodox. But what you discovered here was a faith community that created room for you rather than insisting on you conforming to it. Now that's a big deal. And I know that many of you, or at least many of the folks here who migrated from the big church, also like that about our present incarnation. So as this place thinks about the future, and we invite you out there in YouTube land to think about the future with us, now that we are less encumbered by the past and think about our mission, it's worth reminding ourselves who we are today. Who we are today. Our the core reason that I happen to be an Episcopalian is that this church claims to be a non-doctrinal church. And that's important because I'm not an Orthodox Christian. Orthodox with a lowercase o. Orthodoxy, by definition, claims to define the boundaries of Christianity. Who's in, who's out, who's not Christian. And the humorous thing, of course, about all that is that there are numerous orthodoxies, and they mostly all reject one another's orthodoxies. It's absolutely nuts. But anyway, to say that we are non-doctrinal doesn't mean we lack doctrines, because we inherited a whole bunch of the doctrines from before the English church broke away from Rome and before the American church broke off from England. But what it does mean is that we do not have new doctrines. We don't have any new doctrines that we did not inherit from ancient history. And what's important to me is that we do not have anyone or any groups of anyone's with the authority to create, measure, or demand conformity to any doctrine. You see, the Episcopal Church in the United States was created way back in the 1700s by a bunch of recovering revolutionaries. People who were allergic to kings and princes and ecclesiastical authorities telling them what to do and how to believe. The last time the Episcopal Church was forced to put somebody on trial for heresy, which I think has only happened twice, it was a retired assistant bishop from Iowa. Go figure. It was back in 1996, and he ordained an openly homosexual man to the diaconate before the church had formally approved such ordinations. 10 conservative bishops, many of whom have long ago left this church, brought the heresy charges. Heresy charges. Like if that's not something from the Middle Ages. So 10 other bishops were impaneled to be the judge and jury for this trial. And in their final verdict, the judges drew a distinction between what they called core doctrine and other matters of faith, belief, practice, and morals. They said that while there were church laws meant to protect core doctrine, matters of faith, of belief, of practice, and of morals were a matter of conscience. Let me repeat that. Matters of faith, matters of belief, matters of practice, matters of morals are a matter of conscience. Not only that, they said that no ecclesiastical body had the authority to direct an individual's conscience. Further, they said that matters of faith, belief, practice, and morals are subject to change, whereas core doctrine is not. Well, here's the key, I think. Those 10 bishops, setting a precedent just like the Supreme Court does, defined doctrine this way. They defined it as the story of God's relationship to God's people found in the New Testament teaching about Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. Now think about that. Basically, by implication, they said that in the Episcopal Church, there is no one and no committee with the authority to dictate, define, or prescribe doctrines and beliefs for matters beyond the New Testament. But what we also know is that all church doctrine is well outside the New Testament, and that both the Old and the New Testament are profoundly and endlessly interpretive. The New Testament teaching about Jesus' life, death, and resurrection is open for debate and interpretation from beginning to end. It's hardly a fine point. So now we come to the doctrine of the Trinity, because this is Trinity Sunday after all. And this congregation is named Trinity. The Trinity was the first well-recorded major conflict within Christianity. It surfaced as the struggle between Athanasius and Arius. And their fight was over the concept of what would become known as the Trinity. It was a fight that caused riots and vigilantism in which groups of thugs beat up the opposition. It spread across the Mediterranean. Was Jesus human? Was he God? Was he God appearing as human? Was he an illusion? Was he a human who then became God? Was he created God, or did he exist eternally with God? It was a huge fight, and it had a riot of answers, and with people willingly violent in opposition to one another. The argument was only resolved by the coercive power of imperial authority, but even then, not completely. As we all know, the Emperor Constantine called together the first council of this newly imperialized religion of Christianity in Nicaea in the year 325. It was held specifically in order to resolve the fight between the opposing forces of Athanasius and Arius. Now, at first, Arius was rejected and sent into exile, and Athanasius was embraced and lionized. But before too long, Constantine rehabilitated Arius and his theology and exiled Athanasius. The so-called Nicene Creed went through a variety of versions, and it's really basically a committee document that took 55 years to draft. In the end, for orthodoxy, Athanasius' version of the Trinity won out. But Arianism didn't go away. It was the form of Christianity that converted the Germanic tribes, who in turn then sacked Rome and reestablished it while they had part of the Roman Empire. But even today, not all Christians are Trinitarians, and not all Trinitarians are Trinitarian in the same way. That panel of bishops installed to hear that case in 1996 basically said, at least in this church, there is no such thing as heresy if there is no one and nothing with authority to determine orthodoxy. All right, that's my soapbox, and I'll step down, sort of. Why does this matter? Because it does. On a very practical level, it has to do with hospitality and keeping Jesus' open table open. Here in Trinity Place, we welcome people no matter what their faith tradition or if they come with no tradition of faith. We're not orthodox, even though individual members of the community may be orthodox in their belief and thought. We offer communion regardless of whether somebody's been baptized, and we don't prescribe a particular doctrine in order to be a full participant in the community of faith. We do not have a belief test, and we do not prescribe belief, period. Instead, we talk about and we wonder about the New Testament teaching about Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. We do it with a variety of thoughts and a variety of beliefs and a variety of doubts. We do it without prescribing the limits of belief. Apparently, some locals here in Geneva have declared that Trinity Church Geneva is not really an Episcopal church because we do some things differently than they do. But that view of what makes or defines a church is a kind of sad, tortured orthodoxy. It's Trinity Sunday, and we can not only declare we are free of buildings and grounds, we are also free of imperial religion. Here, we're an Episcopal community that is not defined by prescriptive doctrines, but rather by a trust of one another in matters of faith, belief, practice, and morals, which is the work of each one's conscience. The really big question the really big question is it matters that we are not orthodox and we don't prescribe belief in order to be fully present and part of the community. I'm sorry. The really big question is that it matters that we are not orthodox and that we do not prescribe belief in order to be fully present and part of this community. And the reason we don't, the biggest reason anyway, is because of healing. Jesus hosted this open table and an open community in which people came for healing. Healing happens in community when people feel safe and know that they are embraced for who they are and as they are. Healing happens in community when people feel loved just by being there with the community, held in love that's impossible to define and perhaps even possible to describe, but you know it when you feel it. Being part of that kind of community turns out to be healing. Not in the sense that it cures our wounds necessarily, but that we can be present with one another in spite of and with our wounds showing. So even though we hold up a doctrine that all of us do not embrace, because some of us do embrace it, and because it's an historic heirloom that we carry forward, we aim to be a healing community. A community in which people feel safe and know they are embraced for who they are and as they are. And we do it not perfectly, probably awkwardly much of the time, but still we do it as a healing community. And I sure am glad that you're part of it. Peace be with you.